Hello everyone, we're going to tackle a bit of a larger topic today. We're going to go for cinema sculpting tools. Now if you've never delved into these, this will be a pretty good video because we're going to go right from the start. And if you're thinking, oh, sculpting's not really something I want to do, you're probably wrong. Sculpting is a great aspect of cinema. Even if you're thinking, well, I don't want to do humans or creatures or monsters, it's useful for quite a few things. It's great for doing landscapes, riverbanks, cliff tops, and you know what, if you're doing products, chocolate bars, any food-based items, you're going to find that the sculpting tools are pretty good for making these items really quickly. So let's have a look at it, shall we? Now the first thing you're going to want to do is switch your layout. What you'll find is you do have this sculpt menu at the top, however, it's not particularly nice trying to use this. Plus you do need to see a lot of other things. So what you should probably do is go up to the top right corner and change your layout to this Sculpt Layout. So with this, what you're going to find is you lose all of your materials and animation settings. You're going to lose your list of objects, although we'll just say it is now a tab just to the side. And what you'll get instead is a set of sculpting tools down the center. So let's go ahead and throw in a sphere object, just a nice bit of geometry to start working on. And because we're going to start sculpting, we're going to change the shape. As ever, we need to make this thing editable. So top left corner, make editable. Now if we get in a little bit closer, how do we start sculpting? How do we start using these tools? Now although we can use these tools, don't do it yet. These tools will work in one of two ways. They will either start just moving the raw points and polygons, which is what they'll do at the moment, or they can create special sculpt data. So we want to go for the latter because that's really kind of the point of this sculpt system. So to enable this, to get it going, click this subdivide button at the top. Now do bear in mind, this subdivide button is completely different from the sort of standard subdivide command that you may be used to as far as your polygon modeling goes. So utterly different, exactly the same name, but different tools. When you press this one here, nothing will initially happen. In fact, let me just show you my wireframe mesh so you can see this. I have this many polygons right now. When I hit this subdivide button, nothing. It doesn't change. This is because the first click on the subdivide button simply activates the sculpt system. It doesn't actually start subdividing just yet. But let's have a quick look to the side, because when we click that button, we get this. This is going to tell us how many times we have subdivided, how many polygons we have, and how much memory it takes. So useful information when you're sculpting, because this is quite a resource-heavy action to do in cinema. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit subdivide a couple more times. We're going to go subdivide. There we go. So this is basically telling us we've now subdivided it properly once. And we've got about 1,000 polygons. Let's hit subdivide again. There you go, up to 4,000 polygons now. And let's just hit it once more. Let's go up to 17,000 polygons. Now, when you do your sculpting, you get to choose what division level you do the sculpting to. So just underneath we have these increase and decrease buttons. So really you can think of this subdivide as the maximum amount of detail this object can have. So I can only have at most 17,000 polys worth of detail. But I don't necessarily want to do all of my sculpting on this sort of high resolution object I have here. I may wish to sort of simplify it a bit and do some bigger, broader changes. So you can actually step down and increase your subdivision whenever you like, so long as that subdivision level actually exists. We'll deal with this a little bit later, but just be aware you can actually step up and down as you're working. So let's just jump straight into using some of our tools, shall we? So I am going to turn this polygon mesh off. I don't actually want to see these lines all over my object. Let's go look through these. So first of all, we have the pull tool. Now when you choose this, you will get a brush, and it's pretty straightforward. You click and drag and it broadly does what the tool is called. So as I draw with this, back and forth, this is going to have been pulling the surface up towards us. So if you just stare at the object and you click and drag, you might not really realize what it's doing. You get some different shading, but it's kind of hard to tell, do look to the side and it's quite obvious as to what it was actually doing. Or if you're working quite low res, you can leave that polygon mesh on and it will sort of give you another visual indication as to what's happening. Okay, so this is the pull tool. I will just say, with all of these tools in sculpting, you can invert them and reverse them with the control key. Or if you're on a Mac, try the command key, that might work instead. What I mean with that is, this is the pull tool, but you'll notice there's no push tool. But that's fine, because we can invert everything. So hold control, and now brush on the object, and you'll notice it now starts pushing the surface away from us. So we can create various indentations into the surface. We've got a lot of settings down here. We will come back to these because there's quite a lot of useful stuff down here. But just for now, the main things you need to know are you have a size and a pressure. And this is basically just the size of your brush. So small brush, large brush. And pressure is how strong it is. So essentially sort of how much it's going to do. If I have a low pressure, this is not going to do that much, but if I have a stronger pressure, it'll move much, much faster. Wacom tablet users, keep in mind your pressure sensitivity will also control these. Now, just as a quicker way to change these, if you're using a decent mouse with a middle click, hold down the middle mouse button. It might be a scroll wheel, depending on your mouse, but you'll find you can move your mouse left and right to choose the size of the brush, or you can middle click up and down to choose the pressure and how strong the brush is going to be. So just a nice quick little tip there to get some more control without having to jump down into these settings all the time. Okay, so let's go down through these lists and we'll come back to these settings afterwards. So pull, well, yep, it pulls. That was nice and easy. Grab, very similar, and I will just say, if you have used the magnet tool in the past, in the polygon tools, it's 99% identical. Grab will literally just pick apart on the surface and pull it further away. So similar to the pull tool, except the pull tool just slowly increases, whereas grab just lets you grab it and move it to wherever your mouse pointer is. Smooth, well, you can probably guess what this one will do. If you've got any detail or any lumpy bits, the smooth tool will smoothen and kind of melt that surface down. Now for these tools, I'm not going to go through them in order, because in order for me to show you certain tools, I have to show you others first, otherwise it doesn't really make that much sense. So I'm just going to skip over a couple for a moment. I'm going to come down to the knife tool. Now again, if you've previously used older versions of Cinema and you think, oh, I know the knife tool, this is for slicing polygons into the surface. Not anymore. That's why they renamed it. The knife tool is literally like taking a knife, a bit grim, jabbing into a surface and sort of sculpting it and carving it around. So if I grab the knife and I try to carve into this surface, it's literally, let me lose that wireframe mesh, it's literally going to sort of stab it and leave this trail behind. Now, I will say certain tools do need more polygons than others. So I've been okay up until this point with my pull and grab tools because they just sort of softly move the surface around. The knife tool is trying to make some detail, and with 17,000 polygons, that's really not that much. So I am going to increase my subdivision even further. I'm going to go for something around the region of 1 million polygons. So subdivide, 70,000, subdivide again, 250,000, and one more time. Might take a moment whilst it processes it and thinks about it, but I now have 1 million polygons. Now when I use my knife tool, I should find I can get a lot more detail when I'm slicing into it with a knife. There we go. Far more detail, far crisper. So that's what the knife tool does. And I will just say this one works very, very well when you invert it. So rather than sort of stabbing downwards into the surface, hold control and you'll find it inverts it and it now pulls up the surface. This is, in a nutshell, one of the best ways to do chocolate bars. A lot of chocolate bars will just have chocolate drizzled over the top. Think of a Mars bar or a Milky Way or something like that. If I just get a larger brush and I weaken it down a bit so it's not too strong. A few drizzles, some over there, oops, hold control so it goes the other way. Control click, so there's one bit of chocolate, there's some more, maybe another little bit down there. Boom! That is the perfect top to a Mars bar. So this is why it's quite useful for a lot of other areas outside of your traditional sort of a character sculpting and modelling. Okay, so there's knife. Now pinch. Pinch is a kind of exaggeration tool. I will just say at this point, there are quite a few tools in here which are very similar. They all cover quite a lot of the same ground as other things, and pinch is one of them. Pinch exaggerates whatever you have, and the direction you pull your mouse in makes a big difference to this. So for example, let's say I've got this sort of a ridge over here for that bit of drizzled chocolate. If I run my mouse back and forth across this with the pinch tool, it will exaggerate and get crisper and crisper as it's literally sort of pinching and pulling it in. But the question is, does it pinch it this way or does it pinch it this way? Is it a horizontal pinch or a vertical one? Well, that's why your mouse direction makes a big difference. Take this horizontal bit here. If I run my pinch tool up and down, this won't get any more detailed because it's trying to pinch it vertically. So if I run my mouse up and down here, pinch just doesn't really do much. But if I run it horizontally, there you go, now it's definitely pinching it. So basically run your pinch tool along the contours because that's the direction everything's going to get pinched in. Okay, now there's quite a few tools which are here to remove detail. We've already kind of looked at one of them, smooth. So I could smoothen this off and it just sort of loses all of its detail as it sort of melts down. Let's undo that. Another choice you've got though is wax. Now in traditional sculpting, if you make a bit of a mistake, let's say you're chiseling into marble, you can fill in with wax and it will sort of fill up that indentation till it reaches the top. And that's kind of what wax will do. If I've got a bit of an indentation, let's go back over here, it will fill these indentations in. Let me just make it quite weak. It'll fill these indentations in and sort of raise the surface up. So you're filling in the gaps. But if you keep going, it will keep drizzling wax on top until it gets higher and higher and higher and higher. So you really are literally sort of, well, obviously not literally, but you are effectively drizzling melted wax onto the surface. Very similar though is flatten. Flatten will look for detail and it will just smush it into a completely flattened off canvas. It's literally, again, maybe not literally, it's effectively like sort of a hammering on the surface to flatten it off. But again, there's another tool called scrape. Scrape will also remove detail. This one is quite good when you want to create this plateau at the top of a surface. So if I have these melted chocolate bits here all sticking out, you can see those. If I scrape them, I guess it's a bit like taking a razor blade and just removing the top surface of an object, just sort of skimming it off. So if I run my mouse across here, it skims the top surface. So it's left this area down in the middle, but it's skimmed across the top there and given me this sort of flat plateaued top surface. So it looks like someone's taken a razor and sort of skimmed it and trimmed off the top surface. So, you know, again, it's a bit different, it has its uses, but you can see it is really just removing detail again. And sort of on to the final one of these. Oh, sorry, there's another two more. Fill. Fill is going to be very, very much like the wax tool. If you have any indentations, the fill tool will fill those in first and raise it up until it reaches the level of the highest bit around it. So if I find these sections over here, fill won't increase the height of this outer section. It'll only fill in this middle bit. So as I drag over there, it fills it in and it raises it up. So again, not a million miles different from what the wax tool does. So, you know, use whichever tool you think is the easiest to handle. But the final one down here, and this is the sort of slightly different one, potentially the most useful one. all of these tools are going to take your surface and do something to it. They're going to raise up the surface, they're going to trim a bit off the top, they're going to hammer it flat. The erase tool will take all of your brush strokes and remove them, leaving you with the original shape that we were working on. So all this nice lovely detail we've got over here, for example, erase will completely and utterly obliterate it, taking me all the way back to a perfectly round sphere. And that's one of the beauties of the sculpting system in general. All of your brush strokes are stored in a sort of layer of paint, a layer of sculpting. These are not permanent changes we're making to the surface, so we can remove them, we can layer them up, we can simplify them. There's a lot of nice things we can do because of this fact. Anyway, was that the last of the tools? So yep. The only other ones left are Inflate and Amplify. We'll come to Repeat in a little while. It's a bit of a different one. But Inflate and Amplify, well, again, they really do what the name suggests. So Amplify exaggerates all detail. So Pinch is good for adding sort of extra little fine crispness to a surface. But Amplify will just take anything you have and exaggerate it. So high bits will get higher, low bits will get lower. Whatever detail you see there, there'll just be a lot more contrast as it really exaggerates and pushes and pulls everything further than it already was. So if you've sculpted something but you've realised, oh, these lizard scales aren't deep enough, or this chocolate drizzled on top hasn't gone up high enough, don't put more on top, just exaggerate it with the Amplify tool. And the Inflate tool, well, you run it round and it inflates the surface. It just sort of gets larger and more bulbous and it comes out. You know, there it is. That's all it does. Not the most useful of all the sculpting tools. Okay, so that's broadly what your main sculpting tools do. Let's have another look at some of these settings down in the corner, because we really haven't looked at many of these at all. So, settings. Okay, link, size, pressure, and symmetry. You may notice that all these tools, pull, this one has a brush size of 47, grab, this has a brush size of 60, knife, this one has a brush size of 34. They all have different brush sizes. If you just want them to simply all be the same, you can link the size, and now they will all say 24. No matter which tool I use, they will all have a brush size of 24. And you can probably guess what the others do. So pressure, I can choose how strong these effects will be, and then they'll all have a pressure of, say, 38. Oops, well, the ones which have a pressure will anyway. So that just saves you a bit of clicking around if you want to try and duplicate your settings. Blah, 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 don't worry about this. Now, presets. Cinema ships with a lot of presets for your brushes. How these work, though, in my humble opinion, this setting is in a bit of a weird place, because you might look at this and think, well, I'm using my pull tool, and these are the pull settings, and I'm going to load a preset for my pull tool. No. These brush presets, if I hit load, here they are, these are various patterns, scratches, damage, screw heads, pretty patterns, zipper patterns. There's all sorts of really nice, useful stuff in here. But these are not presets for the pull tool. These are presets for whatever tool. So some of these tools are designed to be used in a certain mode. For example, if I want to draw a zipper onto a surface, this would require putting lots and lots of little teeth repeating in a straight line. That tool really needs to use the repeat mode, and it would. You can see here I have the pull tool activated, but if I load, down at the bottom, a zipper preset, Cinema automatically puts me into the repeat tool. So these are not settings for a tool, these are settings which will activate a tool and fill in lots of details for you. So don't slip into that trap. But by the way, that's really what the repeat tool is for. It's for any brushes, any presets where it needs to repeat something. So if you're putting lots of rivets in, lots of Well, take a look. Lots of little zipper patterns. These are things which keep repeating again and again. That's what the repeat tool does. It just repeats the same brush in a row. As a quick example, here's our zipper repeat brush. So you can very quickly stick a nice zip on your surface. Good for doing sort of clothing or Frankenstein's monsters kind of images. Okay, but let's skip the presets for a moment because the presets will do things I haven't explained yet. So let's just come back to those in a sec. So size and pressure, they're easy. Now steady stroke. Let's go back to the knife tool, for example. Steady stroke is quite a nice simple system which prevents you from having a wobbly jagged hand. Or actually, I'll tell you what, let's do it with the pull tool because I can do it with a very small brush. Okay, let's say I'm trying to draw a nice smooth curve with my pull tool. I'm trying to do a nice smooth curve, but my computer's a bit slow, or I've got a bit of a wobbly hand, or I've got a rubbish mouse, and as I'm trying to draw this nice smooth curve, I'm sort of jittering around a little bit. I can't exactly get this nice straight line that I'm after. I am exaggerating this a little bit to demonstrate it, but you can see what I mean. Steady stroke basically puts a leash onto your brush. If we turn it on and we crank up the length just to really show what it's going to do, when you start painting, you will see this blue line. So my pull tool right now isn't pulling anything. But when I get to the end of the leash, there, it starts drawing. You can see the pull tool is now activating, but it only activates at the end of this blue leash. The idea is, if you have a wobbly hand doesn't draw a stroke. And even if you do get far away enough and you have a wobbly hand, so I'm really exaggerating it here now, it will still draw a smooth thing because it's only drawing at the end of that blue leash. So I can make, as wobbly as my hand might be, wobble, 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 I can draw this nice smooth stroke without any wobbliness in it. So that is what steady stroke is. It's quite a nice simple little tool. It's usable on pretty much all of the sculpting tools, and it works rather nicely. So just choose how long the leash is and away you go. Let's see, spacing, not too much use here to be honest with the spacing. Spacing just keeps repeating your brush, but given that we have a repeat option, it kind of makes it a little bit redundant. I guess the only thing I could really suggest for something like this is if you need a repeated pattern of really simple, just little dots, for example, or really simple sort of little brush strokes, it can have its uses. So normally when I draw this, you get this one single continuous line. Well, if I turn on spacing and I say spread them out really far, then when I draw, I'll just get this series of little dots, dot, 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 dot. In fact, let's increase the spacing further. Let's increase the pressure. So when I draw, dot, 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 dot. So it's as if you're going click, 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 click with your mouse. I guess if you're doing sort of little sort of cut here, little perforations on a surface, you could do it quite easily that way. There you go, lots of nice little perforations or bullet holes from a machine gun going rat-a-tat at a plane maybe. Anyway, that's largely about all the useful things. Don't worry too much about these other bits at the bottom. You know, they're not the most useful stuff. So let's turn that off for a second and let's quickly have a look at some of these other bits. So your 2 or 3 main other areas are going to be stamps, symmetry and stencil. So stamp, basically you load in a grayscale image and Cinema will stamp it down onto the surface. And to be honest, this is where the presets come in quite handy. If I load in a preset brush, so if I load in this rivet head. Now just watch out with some of these presets. Have a look at the file name. You see this thing here is called Capstan Screw Repeat. This next one here is called Capstan Screw Single. This is something they use in the naming of the files to try and give you a bit of a hint as to how it's going to work. So the repeating one, if I load that preset, this is going to allow me to sort of keep drawing lots of screw heads. So as I click and drag, it will keep repeating as it follows my mouse. So let's just get a bit of a smaller brush, put some over here. So this is the repeating brush, lots of rivets. Whereas if you go for one of the presets which says single, you will get a single screw head, but the difference is when you click and drag, you don't get a trail. Instead, what you do is you get the ability to choose how large that brush is going to be. So I'll go for a large screw there, a medium screw there, a small screw here. You could do some interesting stuff with this, especially when you start looking at the presets like the cracks and the breaks. Because if I want to put a crack in here, I can click and drag, and this will choose not only the size of the crack, but also the orientation. So I can put a nice bit of damage running through there very, very easily. But what we're essentially doing here, these are stamps. We are stamping down a bit of artwork into the 3D mesh. So you can either just load the presets in to do this and, load them under the brush presets. And there are loads and loads of them, so you're not going to run out of these anytime soon. Or if you want, if you have your own grayscale image, you can simply load it in as an image. Bit of advice, go raid the ZBrush website presets. Pretty much all of their brush presets are just grayscale images, and we can kind of steal them. Teehee. But in here, you do have a few choices. How rotated should it be? How large? Do you want to flip it? Fairly bog standard stuff. Anyway, there you go. There's your stamps. And I'm going to skip over for a moment to the stencil, because stamps and stencils are very, very, very similar. A stamp is a one-off, where you just go ka-chunk. There's your image. The stencil is a bit different. Let me turn this off. In fact, let me reset my brush entirely, so I don't have any weird settings turned on. With a stencil, go to the stencil section. Down here where it says image, click the button to the side and go find a nice grayscale image. Or it doesn't actually technically have to be grayscale at all. So if I go to my pictures and I look at my textures, I've got images here of crocodile skins, sponge surfaces, various different sort of patterns and textures. And we can sort of, what's the word? Is it a brass rubbing? Where you sort of go to old tombstones with some paper and a crayon and you sort of rub the crayon on the paper. It's a bit like that. So let's say I go for this crocodile skin. Okay, we get this ghost. I'm not sure how well this will show up on the YouTube video, but there is this sort of ghostly crocodile skin image in my viewport here. In fact, let me just turn up the opacity of this a little bit. Where are we gone? Transparency, there we are. So I can choose how strong this picture is. So this is what we're looking at, this crocodile skin. And down here in the settings, you can choose how transparent it goes, what angle it sits at, how large it should be. So use these to position your image, your artwork over the surface and make it a bit more transparent so we can see the object underneath. But we can now paint and brush onto the surface. So when I click and drag, so this is using the pull tool. When I paint, we get this. You're going to see that crocodile skin rubbing and appearing on the surface below. If I load in a different image, let's just go for something a bit more obvious, maybe this sort of series of keypad buttons. I can stencil these on and go but you can keep moving around and keep applying these. So this would be great, for example, for applying fish scales to a surface, because you can just sort of sit there and endlessly brush these things onto the surface. Quite a nice thing, just great for putting a large scale texturing onto a surface. Anyway, there you go, there's your stencil. Let's turn this off. The last thing we've got in here really though is the symmetry. This is the ability to flip your brush strokes from one side to another. So if you are, for example, trying to do a human character or some other creature and you're thinking, well, this side is the same as the other side, it's a complete mirror. Well, go to your symmetry and choose whether you want it to flip over X, Y or Z. It's usually X. X is a left to right mirror. So if I get my brush, anything I do on this side, let's make it a bit stronger and a bit smaller, anything I do on one side will now happen on the other side as well. Now, I will just say, if you have been doing your sculpting and you forgot to turn on the symmetry option, it is possible to apply symmetry after you've done your work. So if you've drawn and sculpted half of your amazing sculpting, have a look over here. We do have a Sculpt Symmetry button as well. If you click on this, this is a one-off tool. So you essentially sculpt one half of the object, run this command, and you can then flip the whole thing over to the other side. So again, you just choose X, Y, or Z, and when you're happy, you just hit this mirror object button, and it will simply flip everything over from one side to the other. So it's now completely symmetrical. So that's a nice little useful thing if you don't want to do symmetry as you're working. Right, let's see, what else do we need to talk about? So that's your tools. That's pretty much most of your settings down there. Okay, layers. Now, when you're doing this sculpting, your drawing that you're doing, your sculpting, it's not just simply applying it to the mesh and then that's it, you're done. You're actually drawing these things onto separate layers. So I've done all of this lovely, beautiful, artistic sculpting onto my base object layer. What I can do, if I want to add some extra detail, but I'm not sure if I want to tone it down later or if it's too strong, or I don't want to accidentally ruin any of these lovely screw heads I've got on my surface here, you can put it on a new layer. Now this whole section up here, this is pretty much the same as Photoshop's layer system. So these are your layers, you've got the opacity at the top, and you can add layers, add folders, delete them, clear the layer so it resets it, and then you've got options here for flattening layers down. But this, in its base simplicity, click this very first button here to add a new layer. Maybe give the layer a sensible name such as Fine Details. And you can now start doing all your nice little fine details on this layer. So I could get my knife tool and do some little sculpting around there, a bit of this over there, a bit of this, bit of that. But the beauty is, this is not just blandly on the surface. I can turn the layer on and off, so that sculpting I've done is sort of safe by itself. Or I can tone it down. If I think my fine details here are a bit too strong, I could just turn the strength down and ease back how strong those details are. It's quite useful. And again, feel free to make lots of layers, make folders, arrange this stuff however you like. It's sort of the normal Photoshop style. And okay, let's see, go down the list here. Right, masking. Okay, so if you're familiar with this in Photoshop, it's the same thing. If you're not, let me quickly show you. Masking allows you to choose where you can and can't paint. So let's say I like this area here and I don't want to accidentally ruin it. Go to Mask, and you now have a brush. You can click and drag to paint. This is essentially an area which won't be touched. So there you go, I've masked off this area, and now when I use any of my brushes, I can paint over here perfectly fine. That's all good. But when I get to the black area, nothing happens. It simply stops. So it's just a way for you to quickly protect certain areas from being accidentally sculpted onto. And down here, all these settings, again, they should be fairly intuitive. Invert the mask if you want to change your mind about which bit you're working on. Clear the mask if you want to start again. Or if you have made a mask and you're thinking, right, that's lovely, but I want to get this thing out of the way, you can hide the masked area and it will literally just sort of temporarily cut it out the surface for you so it's no longer in the way. Anyway, let's clear the mask, turn the mask off. Right. And there we are. Okay, so these bits at the bottom, these are the last areas. Now what we've got down here is bake for your sculpting. We've already done the symmetry. Not sure I'm really going to mention the project mesh. Projecting the mesh allows you to take another object and project it down onto the other surface. It has its uses, but I'm going to skip over that for today, just try and get through this a bit quicker. And unsubdivide. Now let's just quickly cover this last one down there because that's an interesting tool. Sometimes your model is already going to have been made. You'll have made it somewhere else, or you'll have downloaded it and you just want to do some sculpting on top. But unfortunately, whoever's made it or whoever's provided it, they haven't given it to you in the base polygons. They've already subdivided it and flattened down the object. So for example, maybe we have this lovely object here. We're just going to throw some divisions on there, some of this, some of that, maybe a little indentation, and we've subdivided it with this subdivision surface. So let's just look at our objects, pop that in there, subdivide the surface a couple of times, and flatten it all down, make it editable. So maybe you've got this, you've loaded it in, and it's already sort of smooth and divided. This is not the ideal mesh for you to sculpt on. What you ideally want to do is do your sculpting on the original blocky base mesh that this all started from. And that's pretty much what unsubdivide does. You take your object, and so long as it's got a very nice clean mesh like this, if it's covered in all sorts of triangles and faceted bits, don't even bother trying this. It has to be a nice, good quality mesh. But basically choose the object and hit unsubdivide. That's it. What it will do is it will leave you with your original copy, and it will create a new object for you, which is the unsubdivided version. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're looking at this and thinking, Mash, you've gone mad. That's the same object. What's he on about? Well, it isn't. If I choose my new copy of the object, which is this one here. By the way, this blue tag with an S, this is your Sculpt tag. This is how you can tell which one is which. If I delete that, this is what the object really looks like. All Cinema was doing is it was turning the Sculpt system on and redividing it back down to the smooth surface for us. So if you do want to just unsubdivide it, just remove that tag and there you go. That's sort of pretty much the original object. But it does mean now with this object, I can increase and decrease the subdivisions. So it's a pretty nice little tool. It'll basically sort of reverse engineer what the original object must have looked like for this new smooth version to have been made from it. Okay, let's just put that back and go back to our other scene. So that's your unsubdivide. The last bit then really is baking. Now, baking is a way for you to make all of the sculpting you've done permanent. Or rather, it's a way for you to make all of the sculpting you've done apply to a low resolution mesh. So right now, I have 1 million polygons in here. This is a very, very heavy, dense object with lots of detail on it. And I don't necessarily want an object this heavy in my project. So what baking lets us do is apply this to a low resolution version. Choose your sculpt, hit the bake button, and in this window which appears, we have a few choices. Now what this does is it creates a material with a series of displacement, bump maps, normal maps, ambient occlusion maps, just things which will make it look good. So we've got to choose where the files will go and what they've got to be called. So I am just going to choose my desktop, and I'm going to say, right, save this as awesome thing. Okay, format. What file format do you want to save these as? You know what? TIFF's fine. Unless you've got a really good reason, don't change it. Color depth. How much data per layer does it use? Again, 32-bit is good. Unless you've got a good reason, I would really just leave this at 32. Don't go any lower than 16-bit, otherwise you're going to have problems. And then the resolution. Okay, so because this is making a picture, it has to have a resolution. And the question is, what resolution should you have? And there's no hard and fast rule, but I do have a good sort of rule of thumb you can follow if you want. My object has 1 million polygons. A simple rule of thumb you can follow is whatever your polygon count is, quadruple it, and that's how many pixels would give you a pretty decent result. So, 1,000 by 1,000, for example. If you whack this into a calculator, the answer is 1 million. This is 1 million pixels, or a megapixel if you like. This means I would get roughly 1 pixel of data for each polygon on my object. And that's not really quite enough. You start to get some jagged edges when you do this. Essentially, I just want the next setting up, which would be 2000 by 2000. Do the maths, that's pretty much 4 million pixels. So I've got a million polygons, quadruple it, go for 4 million pixels. Again, just another example, maybe your mesh is 3 million polygons. Quadruple it, that's 12 million. Just choose whichever one of these is closest. So 4 by 4 would be pretty good. Anyway, so I'm going to go for 2000 pixels because it's just a bit more than I need. That's all fine, don't worry about those parts. Let's jump on over to our next page. So options. What do we bake? Well, one of the main points of sculpting is that you're going to be pushing and pulling things up and down to displace the surface. So you know what? We want to bake the displacement. That is fundamentally the sculpting. Another choice you've got is normals. The normal is a way for cinema to add lots of little fine detail. If you're not sure about normal maps, just think of them as a bump map. So this is your big heavy changes for displacement, and normal is your small fine little details. So again, I would normally bake those as well. These first two checkboxes are really what sculpting is about. You've then got a few optional bits. One of them is ambient occlusion. You can, if you want, get cinema to put lots of sort of dirt and grit and darkness into all the indentations. Now this wouldn't be much different from you jumping into your render settings and saying, hey, I want some ambient occlusion, or doing it through a material yourself, but this would bake it and make it permanent. So it's optional. I will say this will slow down the baking process quite a lot. This process already takes a minute or two at the best of times. This would sort of double it or triple how long it takes, so it adds a little while. And then you've got optimal mapping. Now here's the question. Does your object have good UV data? If you've no idea what I'm talking about, turn this on. Your object has to have good texture mapping data, because that texture mapping data is what this displacement is going to use. So if your object already has good UV data, and I will just say, if you've used a sphere like I have, this has good UVs, you can leave this alone. But if you've got another model which you've sculpted yourself and you don't know about the UVs, or you haven't laid the UVs out, turn it on for safety. Just turn it on. Cubic or angle, there's not a massive amount of difference between it. Just try one, bake it, and if it doesn't work, try the other one. There's my lazy answer for you anyway. This you can all leave it alone, because this is kind of what you want to do by default. You want to bake the highest amount of detail, level 6, into the most basic mesh, level 0. So this is pretty much what you tend to want most of the time. You'd only turn on extra settings in here if you're trying to do... usually if you're trying to make assets for a game with multiple levels of detail, so don't worry too much about changing this. And as for settings, again, we can leave this, we can leave this, and we can leave all of this. You don't tend to need much in settings. Again, unless you're taking your files you're making into another bit of software, like ZBrush or Unity or Unreal, some sort of other engine, where they might specify they want certain tangent types and certain displacement orders. If you have no idea what that is, leave it alone. If you know that you do need certain RGB orders, you can change them in here. Okay, so that's all set up. File name, format, pick a resolution, and turn on these first two settings. That's your sort of standard fare. And when you're ready, hit bake. Cinema will now go through a process of working out where things are, converting your sculpted data into a series of images, and when it's done, which has actually happened quite quickly here, you will find, if you look at your list of objects, we have two. The one with the blue S is your original sculpting. So we'll just move that one off to the side. So this is our original. And this white one is our baked version. Now you may look at this and think, that doesn't look as good as my original. And you're right. But what we have, if we go back to our standard layout, so we can see all of our materials, start up. Okay, here's our material, and what we have is a series of normal maps with fine detail and displacement maps with big chunky detail. But the point is, This one here, which we sculpted, has 1,000,000 polygons. And this new one it's created is the very, very original object we started from. So it's super, super low detail. But the beauty is that when you hit render on these, all of this detail will appear on your other object. Look at that. Beautiful. So you can have all of this detail, but only need a couple of hundred polygons, not 1,000,000. I could now take this object, duplicate it many, many times, and my computer wouldn't really slow down very much at all. And there you go. That's sculpting, and this specifically is the point of your baking. So all the detail we see here, you don't see it in the editor in real time, but when you hit render, there you go. There's all your detail. Okay, there we go then. I think that's pretty much our sculpting video done. I hope this has been useful. I hope you now see that sculpting can be used for a lot of different things, not just for characters and monsters. Go model yourself some chocolate bars, go model yourself some mountains and some cliffs, and I'll see you in the next video. This is Mash from 3D Fluff. Till next time.